Hi, welcome. This is Migrate. Why migrate to Drupal 8 now? Toby, you're first.
So I guess a couple of quick introductions. So my name is Toby Hagler. I am a Director of Engineering at Phase 2. I've been there for about 10 years, and I am an Acquia certified Drupal Grandmaster.
I like to make fun of him for that. Hi, I'm fhaynes. I'm the VP of Account Services at Phase 2, and I have been there for about 7 years. More importantly, Toby and I started working on Drupal projects together on a newspaper website using Drupal 4.6 nearly 15 years ago. And since then, over the years, we have been migrating many sites and platforms from one version to the next, and we have a lot of experience combined between the two of us. So we want to help you with that today. Surprisingly, we're still friends.
With only a couple of scrapes. Not many.
I am not responsible for that, I swear. He is on the wrong side because he's injured, though, so he looks a little awkward.
Yeah.
It's just because he's not used to standing
I'm used to talking
over
to the crowd this way, so.
So I did want to ask quickly, how many people in the crowd are using D7 today? Oh my.
Yeah, all right.
Does anybody happen to be using D6? Is there anyone left out there? All right.
Oh, man.
I do know people, but I'm glad to hear that it's not this crowd. Are you guys, do you have specific reasons you haven't made the jump yet? Does anyone want to share them real quick?
You can just shout them out.
Well, we are waiting for more modules to be available.
Okay.
All right, so. I'm sorry?
Needy customers.
Needy customers?
That's a good one.
So people want more features added to your current site. You don't have time to stop production, and yeah, okay. And in your case, you need some certain modules that don't exist in D8 still?
Well, they're just starting to now, but they didn't for a while.
Okay, not for a while. Yeah.
Integration problems. They can have integration capability.
Yeah, okay.
Fear migration.
Yeah.
Fear of
migration.
That is a valid fear. There should be a word for that.
That's up there with that evolutionary like lizard brain, right? Like the fear of migration. Yeah. Well, hopefully we can help you with that.
Yeah.
So just before we begin, there's some really important dates that we want to talk about that are going to impact your current D7 platform. So Drupal 9 is coming out in just a hair over 10 months. 1 year after Drupal 9 is released, both 7 and 8 are going to release, they're going to reach their end of life. They're going to go away. There's no more security updates. There's no more bug fixes. So you're going to have to get off of Drupal 7 at some point, which is why I assume you're all here. And you know, as you know, projects always take longer than you anticipate. So you're going to need as much transitory time as possible. So if you want to migrate from Drupal 7, you know that Drupal 9 is going to come out in less than a year. Why don't we wait, right? Like, why not get, what's the process from getting to Drupal 7 to Drupal 9? It's easy. It's migrate to Drupal 8, right? Easy peasy. We're all convinced. Done. That's it. Yeah. That's the why.
Just kidding. We are going to talk about a couple other things today. We have a little more information for you than that. This is an overview of a lot of different topics about why you should move now and how do we get going and building your case. And a lot of these topics probably could be a whole session in and of themselves. So if we don't go into enough depth for you or you're interested, just ask us about it. We're more than happy to talk a little bit more about anything in particular that we go over today. We're going to talk about why you should migrate and why doing it now is a good idea. Where I'm hoping all of you are excited about D8 because you're here. Yay! You need to get your broader organization on board, probably, or needy customers, or get over the fear of migration, or figure out what that integration point might be. We'll be talking about how to plan successfully for this move, and setting some priorities and going through your features and content to get moving, and how you can figure out what maps to what. And we'll also cover a little bit about how to build this, your D8 version smoothly so it will go right into D9 for you. There's not another big migration to happen. And we'll talk a little bit about that. This is kind of the last big rebuild the car. And we can work technology, we promise. So why migrate now?
So there's a couple of really important reasons to migrate to Drupal 8 now. Drupal 7, like I said, is approaching its end of life in the year 2021, which sounds like the future. It's actually not. It's around the corner. Not only is the CMS coming to an end, also your server infrastructure is reaching its end of life as well. It's not just your CMS. It's a whole network of things, right? So there's the potential that your site may be out of date. Your hosting platform may also be out of date. You may be closing on security concerns. There's a whole lot of factors just sort of ancillary to your CMS as well. So here's kind of what the timeline looks like. This is a known timeline.
Go ahead and get started.
Well, we already got started. So we've got kind of a timeline of when things are coming out. These actually will impact.
My name is Corey Jarenka, and we're here today to talk about trends in content strategy.
Interesting.
A little bit about you before we introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
We'd love to get a show of hands in the audience. Like, who is
it-
a content strategist?
Is anybody a content strategist? I mean, I'll play slideshow karaoke. It's fine. All right, so give us 1 second. I think somebody's going to go see what we can figure out.
The audio problem.
So thank you for coming and joining in our talk.
I will be sad if you all decide this one sounds more interesting than the others, just for the record.
Actually, I was thinking about heading next door.
So my name is Corey Karankup, like I said before. I am the Director of Content Strategy.
So how about those long lines, huh?
I can't even get access to that, so I'm texting them now.
Okay, cool.
So this is a great way for us to be able to have 2 sessions at once because you were able to not get in so early.
And content strategy is critical to a migration plan, to be fair.
Also, nonprofits and private companies
Failed migration.
such as
Yeah, this is a failed migration.
Yes, well. And I'm really excited to be here today, and thanks again for coming
You
to
know,
join us.
really nice the slides up.
And with
I
that,
know.
It's very poorly rehearsed. I'll be honest.
However, my ventriloquist skills. I can't even say it. My ventriloquist skills are on point today.
That's a word you can only say without moving your lips.
Oh, that's why. Okay. So normally in meetings at work, I require dad jokes at this point when there's an awkward silence, and I don't have any prep. So.
Oh, I've got plenty. So, 2 database engineers walk into a restaurant. Walk up.
there's such a
Excuse me.
variety of folks
May I join your table?
We wanted to.
That's a new level.
I get slapped a lot.
Definition that is widely used is that content strategy planning.
Maybe that's why there were the lines this morning, right?
Content strategy is also a couple
Are they
of
just
other
still looking on
things
their
that
phone?
we're going to focus on today.
The real question is are they getting our audio?
Evolving discipline and always has been.
This was the overflow room.
Yet it's mature enough.
Oh, was it?
Okay.
So they're probably still connected. Yeah.
It's also new enough for
Makes sense.
innovation, and that's what we want to talk about today.
Well, I know we're just going to have to cut all the really important stuff at the end now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll
Content
just go through
strategy
it.
areas.
We'll shut off. We'll do Act 1 and Act 2, and then you'll come back and pay for Act 3 later, right?
Design, structured content, and empirical decision making.
Someone's on their way. That's all Greek to me. I don't want to work that stuff.
So first,
All right.
we're going to talk about governance. And that's something that I think is a really hot topic, especially in content strategy and website redesigns overall.
Yeah. If there's a way to kill the speaker, I can actually just.
We can talk very loud until we get it fixed, guys.
Oh. No.
She's
All right.
gone, right?
Yeah. Like
So
we just need to,
I don't know if I can give you the slides.
if we just
but
need to project, we're fine. Toby can do it anyway, and if
Yeah.
I have some friends in the audience that'll tell me to speak up if I'm not speaking loudly enough.
Okay. And,
All right.
and
those
we're
are your
still.
slides.
Yeah,
Yeah, these are our slides.
Perfect.
I don't know if we're recording.
You are. 'cause it's
Okay.
red.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
All right, let's go.
in that case, yay!
Thanks for hanging with us.
Dear editor, please cut out the last 10 minutes. All right,
Only
so
four.
so we're going to have to probably make up some time here. So very quickly, I'm sure you've been able to look at this slide already, but this is the Drupal release cycle for Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. The important thing to note is once Drupal 9 is released, there's 1 year for 7 and 8 before they reach end of life. After that, there's only going to be commercial support. There's not going to be any Drupal community support.
So to me, all that is like, oh, scary timelines. But there's another really important reason I would encourage you to migrate soon. One of the really important reasons I would encourage you to look at migrating now is there's a lot of reasons for using open source software, and there's a lot of reasons you might have gone to it in the first place. Let's ditch licensing fees, flexibility, the ability to develop on it myself. But my favorite reason for using open source and community supported software is that power of community. It's the many hands make light work. If you want a feature, as somebody had pointed out earlier, Toby knows what module there is out there for it. And as the community moves on, if you're not on the latest system, you're going to get left behind. More and more things will fall on you to have to do yourself because the community is not focused on D7 or, God forbid, D6. And smaller and smaller. Because people aren't learning D7 anymore, they're learning D8. And if they do know D7, they still want to be where the new hotness is, because who doesn't? And they want to work on D8. So you're going to have a harder and harder time finding people to work on the stuff you want to do. Those are some really doom and gloom kind of reasons, like, oh my goodness, you need to move now or it's all going to be ruined. There's a lot of really exciting reasons to make this move too. We want to talk about those as well, not just scary ones.
Yeah, so the bad news is the end of the world is coming. The good news is there's some good stuff in the afterlife. So
Drupal 8 is full of awesome.
Drupal 8 is full of awesome. Yeah, so in the past you may have used panels. You may have abused paragraphs to no end to lay out content. Layout Builder is sort of the replacement for that. It's in core. It's great. It's wonderful. If you think about how much of a pain it is to manage all your media assets using contrib modules in D7, all of that's built into Drupal core now. There's great support for it. Multilingual support, speed and performance is greatly improved. Drupal 8 has what they refer to as fast first. They turn on all of the things that make Drupal fast out of the box. So all of the caching, all of the all of the right settings and configurations are there in place. You don't accidentally forget something when you go to production. Drupal's always allowed you to create or download new modules, but Drupal 8 is actually built on top of the Symfony framework, which is another great framework that's been around for many years, and it adds a new level, a new dimension of extensibility that never was there before. So we talk about modules and hooks, but now we have plugins, services, controllers, very cool stuff if you're a developer. So it's very API-centric. It allows you to share knowledge between other systems, other applications. There's really good revisioning. Editorial control is now built into core. So it lets you keep better records. It lets you be more compliant with record keeping. And it also just has a lot of accessibility to get you closer to the right 508 or WCAG compliance. Now, the best part is there's going to be a lot more features to come. The nice thing about every 6 months Drupal adds a few new features that are backwards compatible. So Drupal 8.8, when that comes out in September, that's going to be the last version of Drupal 8 to actually have new features. Drupal 9.1, when that picks up a year later, is where the after party is going to be. So the best thing about the D9 after party is not going to be a migration. We kind of mentioned that before. This is the last great migration. So it's merely a version bump. It's going to be the same as going from 8.6 to 8.7 to 9.0. And it's going to have as minimal impact as possible on your platform. So I'll explain a little bit more as to why here in a minute.
So talking about APIs and caching and fast first is probably not going to help you with some of your internal stakeholders. It's going to be great for IT folks or developers, and they're going to be like, yes, that sounds great, let's do that. But there are plenty of reasons for your non-tech team members to get excited about Drupal 8. You just need to speak to them in their language and tell them about the impact, not necessarily the tool. How's this going to impact their work or their mission or what they're trying to accomplish? So instead of espousing the virtues of D8 being an API-centric and data-driven piece of software, you can talk about integrating with your ever-growing ecosystem easier and more efficiently. That next data visualization that needs to get data from your system that somebody's interested in is going to be a lot easier to integrate in D8. Instead of layout builder, which to me still sounds like Bob the Builder and I get all tripped up on it, talk to them about putting more control into the hands of your editorial team and your content team, the people that really know the content, to create a lot of great pages. Instead of talking about caching, everybody can appreciate the idea that things are going to be faster and more stable. That's really important. Caching sounds like ATMs. When you're talking about a plugin-based development architecture and extensibility, explain that adding new features and functionality is going to be less expensive in D8. It's going to be easier to do, and they're going to have longer shelf life. It's really good to understand where the current pain points your organization has with the current system. Where are those pain points so you can address them and talk about the impact of the move. Planning for it. This is fun. We've convinced people this is a good idea, and now you're looking at this giant pile of work and you're not quite sure where to start. For the purposes of this conversation, we're assuming you're not doing a massive redesign and reimagining your entire site. We are assuming that you are moving what you have today and you need to get on a new platform, and we're going to make some recommendations around that, but we're not assuming you're completely re-envisioning everything you're doing. So, to make your move easier, think about this as a major move. This is not we're remodeling the kitchen and we're going to pack some stuff up and put it in a pod and then we're going to be back in a month. This is more like I'm taking everything I own, I'm moving to London and I have to put everything in a shipping container, and I need to decide what goes and what doesn't and what value it has to me. And, is it worth the cost of shipping? So, don't move something just because you have it today. That doesn't mean you necessarily need it in D8. And there could potentially, as people have brought up, there's a module I need. Well, do you need it? Do you need that feature? Is that stopping you? Is there something else that does it? Be prepared to clean your house. That is why we have a picture of the Simplicity Goddess, Marie Kondo here. Apply her thinking when you go through the features and content on your site. Do a deep dive into your analytics and channel her. You may not want to ask, does this spark joy? That may not be appropriate for government websites. I understand. But you can ask, does this serve and fulfill a purpose? Does this help us with our mission? What does it do to help our mission? I'm going to recommend you do this for your content and your feature set, not just one or the other. Look at everything. And, you're going to want to ask, why? Why do we have this? What purpose is it fulfilling? Let's talk a little bit more about that. But your soul searching and all your thought into this is going to help you make a better plan. It's going to help you when you're actually in the middle of the project and you have to make decisions. It's going to help you be clear on what you're trying to do throughout the process. So you kind of want to set goals first, and those do start with what's the mission of your agency or department, not necessarily, hey, I have this thing on my website. When you understand that, and everybody I know, when you think about what's the goal of the IRS, to make sure people pay their taxes, everybody knows what the goal and mission overall is. Ask yourself, my digital presence or my website, how is that helping serve the mission? And make sure you understand that. And then think about the desired outcomes. What am I trying to achieve with it? Using the mission and your site goals, decide on the outcomes for this platform. And that includes, if I'm looking at my feature set, does this actually do anything for me or not? Or is this a pet project we did 20 years ago and nobody needs a print to PDF button? It's in every browser. Use your analytics to help do this, and, really think about what you need tomorrow, not what's there today. And then you get to assess everything using this. This is the fun part. It can be a difficult part, too. There's a lot to go through. Review your features first. Get that list of features. Apply the mission and the goals to it. take a critical look at every item and make sure it has a purpose and it's serving that purpose well. Is there something that might do it better? Rank and prioritize these things. I highly recommend you involve a larger group of folks in your organization. People tend to have an affinity for things they're involved in. So pull in people that are using your system and have them help you. You may want to start with the feature set first. You don't necessarily go in blind and ask them, but once you have that, you can use a workshop, an afternoon with people to vote on what's most important, sort out the priorities, figure out where pain points are that you may have missed. I've used things like dot voting or Monopoly money in the past to help figure out what the priority list should be.
Planning poker is another good one.
Planning poker is another good one. Overall, you're looking at all this stuff that you have today and deciding, is it worth the cost of shipping? Is it valuable to you? Then you get to really, really start looking at things that you're probably hoarding. Content. Content is where everybody hoards. Like most sites, yours probably looks like an overstuffed library with not ideal organization, and you may not know where to start. We highly recommend you go in and look at your Drupal UI and look at the content types you have, look at the taxonomies you have, figure out, understand what your IA is. You can usually get your developers to give you a dump, hierarchical dump of all the URLs so you can take a look at it. But dig in and play a new version of your favorite college game, and it's going to be keep, kill, or update. What's going to happen to this piece of content? Depending on the size of your organization, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and you're going to want to find a way that works for you. And if you have thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of content in a very large organization, you're probably going to use one method, where if you have a small organization, a spreadsheet might work just fine, right? There are tools out there to help you. Gather Content is one we really like and have used before, but Google Sheets works pretty well too, and I've used it for even sites that have 10,000 pieces of content on it.
What's that called?
Gather Content? Sorry. There are a lot of others out there too. That's just one we have used. I lost my place, I'm sorry. Delegate. That was the last thing I wanted to say. If you're in a large organization, find ways to parse out the audit of this content to the groups that it matters to. Make it as easy as possible. Give them deadlines and give them clear expectations of what you want and what the goals are, but don't try and do it all yourself. There's a lot of stuff. And I do know with a lot of people, records laws will play into this. So take that into account depending on your organization and the either rules or laws that apply to you. That's not necessarily true in all the businesses we work with, but that is definitely true in government organizations. Then you get to move on to your technology.
Yeah. So you have a sense of what features you need to keep, what your content's going to look like. Now it's time to plan your move from a technical perspective. So keep in mind that you're building a new platform in Drupal 8. You're not necessarily going to replicate what you have now. You need to figure out what you need to replicate, what's absolutely necessary to keep. But this is an opportunity to refactor things. You could build things in a different way that's much more efficient. That actually takes out a couple of steps for your editorial users. So it's a really good opportunity to reevaluate how you're building the platform from the ground up. And then you want to talk about planning an incremental content migration. The incremental part is important because this allows you to start migration very early on. You could start it in sprint 1 of your project. You can start having content getting pulled into your development environments early. This lets you find content model problems. This lets you actually QA the site with real content that your users are going to see. There's no more lorem ipsum that you have to worry about. It also will minimize the double entry time when it does come time to launch. That 2-week period where you have a content freeze and all of a sudden your editors are complaining to you about, what do you mean I have to go put the same piece of content in the old system that's going to go away and the new system that nobody can see, right? So it minimizes that downtime. You can get it down to a matter of hours instead of days or weeks. And there's some great tools that let you do this a lot easier. For instance, a Migrate QA is a great module that allows the source transformation destination process of migration to be highly visible to even your QA people, editors, So they can actually see, oh, this data does transform into the way that we want it, because it might be different, right? So it's hard to automate, but it makes it easy for QA people to actually validate that the migration process is working. So a little bit about assessing your technology. So I'm to the gentleman in the back, I'm really sorry to say, but yeah, you really want to have a feature freeze on your current site. That's the one thing that people hate to hear. But I'm telling you, it's going to save you in the long run, because first of all, this lets you focus all your new development efforts on the new platform. Second, this is going to allow you to freeze all of your content model in the old site, so that when you are doing this incremental migration, you're not breaking your migration tools by changing the sort of like shifting sands underneath it. So it gives you a good foundation to get started on the new platform much quicker. So just think of it as a matter of investing your time in the future rather than in the past. Also consider what APIs, API integration is another thing, right? It's very important. What is consuming your contents, your website's content? Do you have mobile apps that are hitting it? So you have to consider those as well as what is your site actually ingesting from other sources. And then you have third-party integrations. Sometimes these are as simple as single sign-on implementations that you have to rebuild or readjust or reconfigure. So just look at those sorts of things. What does your CMS touch outside of its own little sphere? And then the next thing is to take a look at your module audit. Take a look at the list of modules that you have enabled. And figure out how they correspond to the actual features, because it's not so much important as what modules you have installed. It's what features. It's the functionality of your website. It's how do you deliver your content to your users. So figuring out what modules actually come into play, figuring out what modules you need to keep, and then looking at, is this module in core? Chances are in Drupal 8, so many modules that were contrib became part of core. Remember, views became part of core day one of Drupal 8. Layout Builder has been in the works for 3 years, and media even longer. These things are now part of core. So that's one less thing you have to worry about going and sort of like repiecing together. Or in the case of, finally, the lady here in the middle, you're talking about the modules were not in a great state, for D8 for a really long time. However, Drupal 8, let's see if I can say this in an easy way. Drupal 8 has been out longer now than Drupal 7 was when Drupal 8 came out. So the maturity is there. The contrib space finally does have a really solid sense of maturity. And so there's a good chance that the module you want has either been ported to D8 by now, or there's something similar. An example is organic group, not in D8. Group is now the sort of de facto replacement for that. And there's a migration path that you can find. So the other thing is, do you even need it? Do you need that module anymore? Every Drupal 7 site in the world has CTools installed. Most of them don't now. Right, so figure out which ones you need to keep, which ones you can get rid of, and also consider the fact that your hosting needs are going to change. You're going to be building on PHP 7. You're going to have Composer installed as a dependency manager as part of PHP. So you have new build tools sort of in the mix here. So think about how this is going to impact your infrastructure as well. It's not just your CMS. So you need to make sure that your infrastructure can support PHP 7. 7.2 is the latest version. 7.3 is about to come out, and 7.2 is going to be deprecated very soon. Make sure that you're up to date with MySQL. This is also an opportunity to take a look at your analytics. Find out who is coming to your site, using what browser, using what device. Reevaluate your browser requirements, because now's the time to drop IE10 support.
Please.
Yes. And while you're under the hood, there's some other infrastructural changes you might want to consider. Replacing Memcache with Redis. Not that one's faster than the other, just Redis has a more robust API that makes your developers happy. You might want to consider what you're using for search. Do you still want to use Solr? Do you want to use Elasticsearch? There's a lot of other third-party federated search aggregators that you could use. So those are sort of things that you can think of outside of Drupal that are directly adjacent.
So that's actually 7 minutes slow. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to go a little bit quicker. Sorry, guys. You need a plan. Of course, we already knew that. That's why we're here, right? But you have a full picture of your site. You've made some really hard decisions. You've got people on board. Now go back to your goals again. I love those goals. You got to keep going back to them. Bring together your audits, your technical audits, your content audit, your IA, and your design. And we recommend starting with the backlog. And we'll do this at this point at the epic level, if you're talking in agile terms, but really just big features, not really specific requirements, but at high level, what are the pieces I need? And then get your team to size it. That's the fun part. It's not going to be specific. Once again, you're not trying to be perfect here. We usually use t-shirt sizing if you're aware or have used that technique before. Something's a small, it's a medium, it's a large. This is going to help you build a roadmap. Once you've got, okay, here's what we absolutely know we need, and they're about this big, you can map it. You can figure out what's important. Is time important to you? Is schedule important to you? Is feature set important to you? Very seldom have I ever heard someone say, cost is something that's optional, or we can change it. They always say there's 3 legs in that, three parts of that triangle, and it's not true. There's really only 2 you play with. So you can decide what's important, what the priority list is, give yourself a little padding, assume you're not going to be perfect, decide what that risk tolerance you have is. If you have a very risk adverse organization, go up. If you have a relatively, I wouldn't say risk tolerant, but if you have a more tolerant organization, you can play that down a little bit. Your goal is to get a roadmap out of this, a roadmap that you can use to the plan. It's not going to be perfect, and it's going to be at a relatively high level, but it's going to give you an idea of how long this is going to take, who you're going to need to get it done, and what kind of priorities you have for it. That's something you can share with your organization to really get you kicked off. I highly recommend getting lots of people involved in this. A move of this sort, even if you're not totally revising the design or reimagining your site, is not just a development project. You do have to think about change management in your organization. And people, like we mentioned earlier, are a lot more invested in things that they're involved in. One of the ways I've seen work really well in the past is pull a cross-functional team of people who are going to be affected by this into a beta group or a pilot group that works with you. They can help you with that feature analysis early on. They may be the people you pull in to talk with you about priorities. They may be part of who's helping you with the content audit. Keep them close. Keep them involved. Be very transparent about what you're doing. Expect a little bit of resistance. Everybody gets scared when you change things on them. Even if it's going to be better. So be prepared for that, and assume that this is an enrollment activity. You're trying to bring people on board and get them excited about it. That beta group, that pilot group can help be your ambassadors, and they're also going to help you make a better plan because you're taking their thoughts and their experiences with the current platform into account. We did promise we'd talk about D9 a little bit, and we're getting close to time for questions, so I'm going to let Toby get into it.
So let's assume that you're migrating to Drupal 8. Given the fact that Drupal 9 is coming out in 10 and a half months, this is important to know. So bear with me. I'm going to get a little technical real quick. I'm going to explain semantic versioning in a nutshell. But essentially, it's good to know that in Drupal 8, Drupal began building on top of the Symfony framework. And that's important because that's where a lot of the new extensibility comes from. That's where a lot of the new design patterns come from. One of the reasons it requires later versions of Drupal, of PHP is because Symfony does allow for much better object-oriented programming techniques, design patterns, and so on that far exceeds what Drupal 7 was capable of. In order to work well with Symfony, Drupal adopted the semantic versioning system. So you're going to get everything is going to be a major, a minor, and a patch release for everything. So Drupal 8.1, 8.2, and so on. So in those minor versions, that's where you get new features, but it's assumed that Drupal 8.1 all the way to Drupal 8.9, nothing's going to break going backwards. So it's also important to note that when Drupal 8.2 jumped to 8.3, they actually did change the version of Symfony as a dependency. So we went from Symfony 2 to Symfony 3. Now, in order to keep the backwards compatibility promise of semantic versioning, Drupal core actually introduced a lot of code to sort of mimic what Symfony 2 was doing in a lot of ways, and to provide a bridge between 2 and 3. So we're going to talk a little bit about deprecated code. So this is deprecated code is stuff, yes, you can use in Drupal 8. It's promised to work all the way to the end of Drupal 8, but knowing that you shouldn't use it if at all possible. It's there to keep things backwards compatible. It's not there to go forward. So, Drupal 9, just as a point of fact, will be based on Symfony 4, and so when that happens, that's a good time to, Marie Kondo the Drupal core and get rid of all of that deprecated code, because it's not sparking any joy for any of us. So here's kind of an example of what this looks like. So right now, well, I say right now, next year, Drupal 8.9 will get released, and you're going to have Drupal core, you're going to have Symfony 3, you're going to have a lot of new features that have been added over time, but you're also going to have a pile of deprecated code. Now, when Drupal 8.9 goes to 9, we're going to switch to Symfony 4. We're going to get rid of a lot of this deprecated code. All of those new features get compacted and only using the core of what becomes Drupal 9. So essentially what we've done now is we've removed a lot of that deprecated code. You're dealing with a smaller and tighter code base yet again, and that's sort of the promise of going from 8 to 9 is that you get the benefit of that without losing anything that Drupal 8 actually had to offer.
Or having to do another massive migration or rebuild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
more importantly for me.
So in reality, so Drupal 8.9 and Drupal 9.0 will get released the same day. From a functional perspective, there's no difference. The only difference is the dependencies are going to be updated, and they're going to remove deprecated code. But all of your modules have, as long as you're not using any of that deprecated code, which you know about ahead of time, can easily upgrade from 8 to 9 by just doing a version bump, not a migration. So preparing your D8 site for D9. Again, you want to do a quick audit of your modules. First, start with your custom modules. Make sure you're not using any of that deprecated code. That's generally really easy to fix. Developers, if you're using an IDE like PHP Storm, it'll actually notate that the thing you're using is deprecated. It'll warn you ahead of time before you even commit that code. Also, make sure that contrib modules are up to date. That they're not using any deprecated code. Roughly 40% of the most popular Drupal 8 modules are already cleaned up and ready to go. The other 60%, a lot of those are just some minor changes that need to happen that just haven't for whatever reason. Probably because people are thinking, oh, it's a year away. I don't have to worry about it just yet. This is actually a good opportunity for you to contribute to the Drupal community by providing some patches to contrib modules to get all of those things updated. So if everybody in here takes one module, that could be 20 projects that are updated pretty easily. And that's just kind of the power of the Drupal community. Also to get ready for D9 or stay ready for D9, just making sure that you're leveraging Drupal core as much as possible. Instead of trying to make panels work for Drupal 8, use Layout Builder, that sort of thing. And then, of course, absolutely, take advantage of the fact that Drupal has a massive community that's willing to help, and that will definitely be a lot of the factor of getting ready for Drupal 9. So.
All right. So, the path is understand why you should move. Hopefully, we gave you some good info on that. Know the goals of your site, so you can use that to guide your planning. Sell it to the organization, convince them this is a good idea, audit everything, and make some hard decisions about it, some informed hard decisions about it. And then make that plan and keep in mind some of the things that Toby brought up about D9, especially if you're starting your migration now, because it'll make your upgrade to the next platform go smoothly. And based on all the other migrations in the past, everyone will think you're brilliant because you just moved from D8 to D9 so easily. I apologize, we did rush a little bit at the end, guys, but thank you so much for coming to listen to us. We have about 5 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah, we actually have a fair bit of time.
A few minutes to answer questions, and like I said, several of these topics would be an entire session in themselves, and both of us are more than happy to talk more about it if you have questions.
Is it possible to operate your website in Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 simultaneously? You talked about incremental. And unfortunately, we have such a dynamic site, we can't just move a piece of content. It's not stable. It's changing daily. So if we move, like, for example, our event manager as a unit over to Drupal 8 and link to it, is that possible to do?
I do know people who have used that as a migration plan. They've done different sections of their site at different times and moved over until they're eventually all on D8. I'm actually talking to one that's planning a move like that right now. I think there are some benefits and downfalls, or benefits and pitfalls to the approach, and it may extend your timeline a little bit. So it is a possibility, depending on how you organize things.
Going with t-shirt sizes, let's say you have a large site. Can you give any technical recommendations or best practices for migrating a large site, like tens of thousands of nodes, from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8? I mean, I guess I've been scripted, but anything for you guys?
So are you talking in terms of being able to analyze the features and assign them t-shirt sizes?
So no, I guess I mean, like, let's say we've analyzed our site and we're like, we need to keep all these nodes, and there's like a ton of them. What does that process look like in actually moving those entities and nodes from your Drupal 7 site? Because you have to start with fresh install on Drupal 8, if I'm
Right.
not mistaken.
Yeah.
So like, how do you get all that stuff from database 7 to database 8?
Okay. So make no mistake, yeah, you're absolutely going to want to build from scratch a new Drupal 8 platform. In a lot of cases, you can recreate the content types or taxonomy terms or entities or anything like that that you have in D7 to D8. Drupal 8 has Migrate API built in, and there's a lot of contrib modules that actually will support other things too. But Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 Migrate support is built into Drupal 8. So in the past, they always kind of claimed, to upgrade from 6 to 7, you just turn off all your modules, click the upgrade button, and then turn your modules on back one at a time, and it never really worked, right? Like, it was always kind of the dream. So they kind of said, you know what, that doesn't work. We're going to rip the Band-Aid off. Yes, you have to rebuild because it's architected differently under the hood, but you rebuild in D8, right? So then you take your content types, all your fields, and you get them kind of aligned this way in your D8 side as well. And then using Migrate API, you can essentially just write a couple of plugins that when you execute those, will take this field from this content type, do any kind of transformations that you need to if you want, and then put it into this field. And it recreates all of your nodes in the old site and the new. And so that's essentially how Migrate works, at a high level.
I would say it's two things I recommend with a large migration like that. Definitely start early and review it several times. Have a sample set of content you're reviewing and look at that have the majority of the different options in it, so that you can see how it works, and then refine it until you're happy enough that the rest can just be done, cleanup can be done manually. And a lot of times with really big migrations, which we have done, we start like at the beginning of the project as soon as you have content types, and then just keep running it and refining it until you get to a certain point.
And the nice thing is, we're talking about incremental migration, so you run it and you can get those first 10,000 records over, and then over time, like while you're doing development work, and content is continually getting added to your current site, you run the migration, and it's going to say, oh, I'm going to start at 10,001 and move over the next 100, and the next 100, and the next 100. And so it's able to keep track of where it was migrating, and it does a really good job of keeping track of that. And so you can kind of, like, okay, today I'm going to run migration again and get the next 100 nodes that were created in the last week.
When you do that, how does it account for changes? Like, people are still, like, we have 80,000, 70-something thousand published nodes, crack load of revisions, which we haven't talked about revisions yet. But what happens when we migrate, 1,000 for test content, and then do those 1,000 get copied over again when they've been updated, or do we just have to manually update them?
It does keep track. Okay, this node has been changed, because it does look at when it was created, and it looks at the last updated date, that timestamp, and so it can actually copy over that change. Now, if you're talking about wanting to copy over all your revisions, that does add an extra layer of complexity. but
we
if
don't want to, but we think, as the already said, the content hoarders will want to. So we're trying to figure
Yeah.
out. what
It is
we
hoarding.
can do.
It's hoarding.
We've got 7 years of Drupal 7. We've been running
Yeah.
since late 2012.
so first of all, I would challenge you, ask them, do you really want those revisions?
Well, we're working on that.
Yeah. I mean, I know the answer is always going to be yes, but you can maybe negotiate them to a soft no. But
Or maybe just a couple of them.
yeah, but yeah, the Drupal Migrate API does account for content that has been already migrated and has since been updated into the source and keeps track of it. So one of the things that Migrate does on the D8 side is keep track of everything that's been migrated. So it has a massive lookup table of what it's done and what it needs to redo.
So we are at 147. Do we need?
You're okay.
Oh, we're good?
We're
Okay.
supposed to, everything is supposed to ship back 15 minutes. It's not really happening, but most stuff is starting 5 minutes later, so.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. Cool. I was
Hey,
worried.
found time.
Migrations that you've done or been a part of for like a large project, do you have a ballpark of how much time it has taken? Or I know it's hard to say.
It usually depends on the complexity of the content and the number
Yeah.
of content types. That drives how long it takes more than the volume of content. So if you had 10,000 pieces of content of one content type, that's not going to be as bad as if you had maybe 310. So.
Ironically, the volume of content doesn't make such an impact as the variety of content. So if you have, 10 content types, 100,000 nodes, that's going to migrate pretty quickly. If you have 30 content types and, only a few thousand of each, the migration path gets, pretty significantly longer. But that's actually where, focusing on like what's the MVP for launch? Like what can you truly not migrate? Like making those decisions, it's a little bit of a time investment up front, but it pays dividends by not having to migrate everything and get you there faster. So those are ways to kind of speed things up.
So when we are rebuilding in Drupal 8, if we plan to take advantage of some of the features like using ECK, building some, rebuilding the custom content types in a different way. So is that too many moving parts doing that during the migration, or can we still account for the mapping of the fields and still make it work?
So you're talking about using CCK and 7 to manage?
In Drupal 8 and building custom entities and bundles. It's not the same way that you have your 100 actions given, but you're taking advantage of the ECK and bundles. Can we still map the existing data efficiently?
There has to be transformation.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to involve CCK at this point anymore, but during the migration process, there's always three plugins that are involved. There's a source plugin for your original site, and that's the thing that goes and fetches that data and then just delivers it. And then the next plugin will actually handle like translations, migration, or transformations. So it can say, all right, this data was stored in this format. I need to actually change it because I'm using a core content type and field here now. So so that transformation can happen in the middle. And there's also actually the Migrate QA module can actually help you visualize how that data goes from this format, gets transformed, and gets stored in this format. So you can do a one-to-one translation between fields in a particular content type, even if they're structured differently. By doing that sort of like middle plugin.
We have time for about one more question. Anybody? There.
So about 4.5 years ago, before we switched over to Drupal, we decided not to do 8 and went to 7. And the thought process was that there wasn't enough support for 8. But now looking at one of your slides, you showed that 8.9 is in essence 9. So in about a year, maybe in a year and a half, we're looking to move to 8. Would you suggest we just go to 9?
So no. So I didn't really touch on it because I think we were a little pressed for time. But in the past, people would migrate from Drupal 5. They would stay on as long as they could. Drupal 6 would come out. They'd still stay on 5, hoping that they could just leapfrog to 7. Right. So you get as much longevity out of it as you can. That's not really the case anymore. So going from 6 to 8 or 7 to 8 is the best viable path. because what that allows you to do is that lets you start now. You can start doing the migration now. The Drupal 8 that you start with today is going to be 8.7, then 8.8 is going to come out. 8.9 comes out the same day that Drupal 9 does. And so then you can make the choice, do you want to stay on 8 or 9? And you can always choose 9. Now, you did mention like there was some adoption issues with Drupal 8 in the past. Some modules didn't get upgraded to Drupal 8, sometimes for years. The advantage of this sort of like symphony underpinning of Drupal now allows you to go from 8 to 9 really quickly. So sometimes it's a matter of just changing one little number in an info file of your module, and then you're going to see a much faster adoption from 8 to 9 in the Drupal module community. So that problem of there's a new version of Drupal, I have to rewrite everything, that's not really the case anymore. So you're going to see faster adoption of modules getting upgraded to Drupal 9. But yeah, I would recommend go ahead and plan for Drupal 8 now. Now, if you're not going to start the migration for another year and Drupal 9 comes out, then yes, just upgrade to 9 because that's the same thing as 8. But the key is you're going to have until almost the end of 2021 before 7 is completely cut off. So think about it in terms of how long it's going to take to do that migration. Can you do that in 22 months? So.
Thank you guys so much for coming and spending some time with us today.